Well, many of you probably heard that Forbes magazine just this past week named the Austin Round Rock area America's fastest growing metropolitan area. And it's not the first time that we've had that accolade, but it's the latest reaffirmation of it. In fact, over a 12-month period, 427,000 people have moved into our metro area. Fortunately, we are also the leading community for job creation in the United States. And according to the Census Bureau, we are in Round Rock the second fastest growing city in the country. Austin is the third fastest. So we are in a very good position. Much of that growth has been fueled by the innovative businesses, services, manufacturers, retail, the innovative businesses that are meeting the needs of the community and creating opportunities for employees. And this being January, it's a perfect time for us to take a look at what is the state of American business across sectors, across the country, across Texas. What are the opportunities for business? And what are the challenges that business will be facing in 2013? And what should we be expecting coming down the pipe from Washington, D.C. that affects business? With that in mind, our guest speaker today is an expert in this area. He just returned from Washington, D.C., where he spent part of last week. John Gonzalez is a senior manager of the Southwest and South Central region for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. He's worked in government politics for 20 years. Prior to joining the U.S. Chamber, he was district director for Congressman Michael Burgess. And before that role, he served several Texas elected officials. John started his career with Senator Phil Gramm in 1989. Then in 91, he joined the Bush-Quayle re-election campaign, and that was in Washington, D.C. In 1993, he was part of the campaign team that helped elect Kay Bailey Hutchison to the United States Senate. And after her landslide victory, he then moved back to Dallas to work for the senator in the district office for about 5 years, holding several different positions there. John joined the U.S. Chamber in March 2005. He is a native of Dallas, where he lives with his wife and family. He has a Bachelor of Arts degree in Government and Politics from the University of Texas at Dallas, and also has a daughter who is going to school in this area. And so we are delighted he's a good friend of our Chamber of Commerce and a very strong advocate for business. And with that background, let's have a big Round Rock welcome for John Gonzalez.
Thank you, Doug. Expert. Wow. If the DC office could see me now, I'm an expert. Well, thank you, Doug, for everything you do for the business community here, and thank you for the volunteers and everything you do for the chamber. We are needed, and hopefully, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of perspective on what's happening nationally. But I told Doug, I said, I don't know how many people know a lot about the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, because a lot of places I go to, they say, oh, you're with the Department of Commerce, you federal guys, leave us alone. I'm like, no! The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, we are a chamber, we are a business federation. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C. And so I told Doug I'd say a few words about the U.S. Chamber, talk about our small business outlook survey that just got released a few weeks ago, and then what we call the State of American Business, which Tom Donahue, our president and CEO, announced on January 10th up in Washington, D.C. So to begin, last night while I was doing the dishes, I was thinking about, I'd love to start out with a joke or something funny. I couldn't think of anything, so I may as well just get into it and see what we can do here with the U.S., starting with the U.S. Chamber. Our 100-year anniversary was last year. We celebrated all year long. Doug, I don't know he probably is not going to admit that he deletes my emails when he gets them, but in case he didn't delete this one, we celebrated our 100th anniversary all year long, and with a lot of different events and social events and parties actually across the country, and then even one giant event for founding members of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that we hosted over 600 chambers and chamber members up in Washington, D.C. at our Small Business Summit last year, which was tremendous. But got to read a few things here. I want to make it legitimate. But an idea of a national institute to represent the unified interest of U.S. business first took shape when President Taft, in a speech before Congress on December 7, 1911, addressed the need for, and I quote here, a central organization in touch with associations and chambers of commerce throughout the country and able to keep purely American interests in a closer touch with different phases of commercial affairs. That sounds almost perfect. 100 years ago, that we would need that more than ever. 4 months later, April 12, 1912, President Taft's vision became a reality, and a group of 700 delegates from various commercial and trade organizations came together to create a unified body of business interests that today we call the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. In 1925, construction of the U.S. Chamber's headquarters right across the street from the White House was completed on property that had belonged to Daniel Webster. So 100 years later, the Chamber is the world's largest business federation, representing more than 3 million businesses and organizations of every size, sector, and business and region. It includes hundreds of associations, thousands of local chambers, 106 chambers of American chambers abroad in 94 countries. Our core mission is to fight for business and free enterprise before Congress and the White House, federal agencies, the courts, the court of public opinion, and governments around the world. So that's all the good news that we have the U.S. Chamber fighting for business interests in Washington, D.C. Now, anything that I mentioned that's bad, disregard it. We are in Texas. Like Doug mentioned, I'm from Texas, third generation downside. And so some of these numbers don't apply to anybody here in this room or in the state. But when you're talking about nationally, it brings down, the poor economy in California helps bring down everybody else. And it brings down Texas economy as well because they are doing so poorly. So those folks need some help. But in our fourth quarter, we released our fourth quarter U.S. Small Business Outlook Survey and found some very important responses. The majority of businesses that were polled, 53%, did not hire additional employees in 2012. And nearly 2/3, 64%, did not plan to do so to hire this year. 82% of those polled said the economy was on the wrong track, and 88% would like more certainty from Washington. That's a really high number, but I'm wondering where the 12% is. You know, where they come from? Why do they want less certainty from Washington? I don't know. Got to find those people. I guess it's sort of like Congress. Their approval rating being like 9 or 10, and that pretty much relegates their supporters as family members and staff. So, you know, those 12, I don't know. So on January 10th, we announced our American Jobs and Growth Agenda. We really have there are many proposals and reforms that we're going to be discussing and advocating all year long, but there's really 5 major bullet points. Producing more American energy, expanding American trade, modernizing our regulatory system, reforming immigration and visa policies, and addressing the fiscal crisis is a bold plan that slows the growth of spending and reforms entitlements and overhauls our tax code. So, I want to start with the fiscal crisis that we sort of averted earlier this year. You guys may have heard about it. It was called the fiscal cliff or tax-mageddon. Everybody had a different name for it. But even as difficult as that seemed, and how hard it was to get through that process, we actually eventually got something done. And it's a miracle that Congress was able to get something done based on what happened leading right up to the president signing averting the fiscal cliff. Harry Reid, I believe, on January 1st or 2nd, was on the Senate floor and called Speaker Boehner a dictator. He's running the House like a dictator. And then on January 2nd or so, it was reported by Politico, this is not the U.S. Chamber, but by Politico, that Speaker Boehner said, F you, but the real word, F you, Harry Reid. So we all thought, this is not going to happen, because there's just so much animosity up there. But they were able to get this done, and I have to say, kudos to the minority leader in the Senate, and for helping with that. He reached out to Mitch McConnell, reached out to Vice President Biden, and they were able to all come back to the table with this thing. So we're trying to, we're thankful that they did, but here are our concerns. These battles, these fiscal battles, are going to continue for the remainder of the year. So be prepared. And if anybody needs to take a antidepressant now, is probably a good time to do it. Congress and the administration are soon to face a new round of critical deadlines around debt ceiling, sequestration, and the need to fund government operations. These deadlines will mean more uncertainty for our economy, our businesses, and the financial markets at home and abroad. If you all recall, we passed a debt ceiling increase in August of 2011, and that was a big battle. Here we are 17 months later, and we've gone through $2.1 trillion, and that's gone, and so we're needing to pass another one. So that's the next battle. We must finally face up to the single biggest threat to our economic future, and that is exploding national debt driven by runaway deficit spending, changing demographics, and unsustainable entitlements. That changing demographics, when you hear that, demographics, what you need to pay attention to is what we like to say is there are 77 million Americans that are going to be retiring. It started in 2011. They're going to be retiring over the next 18 years. That's 10,000 Americans a day. 10,000 Americans a day hit the age 65. So those are those changing demographics that we're going to have to pay attention to. If Congress and the President fail to address this threat, automatic spending will soon consume every dollar the federal government collects, leaving nothing for education, national defense, or other essential programs. So here are a few key dates that may prevent, well, hopefully will prevent from all of this happening. But if you're scoring at home, I've got a rundown of these dates, and it's all going to happen very quickly. February 4th, that's the deadline, and that's the date that the president submits his fiscal 2014 budget. And he's already notified Congress that that's going to be delayed, so we're waiting on that. March 1st, the White House and OMB implements $85 billion in across-the-board spending cuts for the remaining 7 months of fiscal year 2013. So that's, if a deal's not done by March 1st, that's when sequestration happens and all those automatic cuts will begin. March 27th, the fiscal 2013 continuing appropriations resolution expires. And that's what funds our agencies and programs, federal government, other federal government programs. April 15th, everybody's favorite day, statutory deadline. It's frequently missed by Congress, but that's the actual day that Congress is supposed to submit their fiscal 2014 budget. And then, of course, I think we all pay our taxes that day. The House may consider, on May 15th, the House may consider fiscal 2014 appropriations bills, even if the final budget resolution has not yet been adopted. May 18th, Congress will need to again raise the current $16 trillion plus debt ceiling in order to continue funding the federal government. So borrowing the additional money. May 18th, that's another big deadline. And then, of course, October 1st, well, that's supposed to be the very first day of the 2014 budget. So that's a lot of stuff that, when you're looking at, are we going to be able to get immigration reform, energy, get some trade, promotional trade authority, reform some regulations, and whatever else somebody else may want the federal government to do and pass this year, you have to look at those dates and wonder if they're going to be able to get any of those things done, or anything that we might want to get done, especially even from the business community, because everything becomes a back burner issue because we've got a crisis on a deadline that is arbitrary, that Congress just made up to hopefully hold their own feet to the fire. But when you make the rules, you can often break your own rules. I'd love to make my own rules. My wife would hate it, but I know I'd love it. So energy, that's one of our key things that we've been talking about. In fact, we have a grassroots organization called where we've been talking about the Keystone XL pipeline and PFA. It's TPA. Anyway, it's got an acronym, and I always forget the name. But their sole responsibility is to go around to states that find it hard to bring themselves around to say, hey, we've got energy and we should be producing more energy, but scary things happen when you do that. So, Partnership to Fuel America, PTA, is a team that works with our Energy Institute. So we have more oil and gas and coal than any other country, and we're the largest single natural gas producer in the world. We are now in position to export liquefied natural gas and coal, and that would reduce our trade deficits and bring billions of dollars into the U.S. coffers. So we are going to continue to push for energy legislation, help expand those jobs that it's created. I think there's something like 19,000 jobs that are affiliated with the energy sector right now, and or it could be up to 19. It's 19,000 now, and it could be like 1.2 million in 20 years. So expanding American trade and investment and tourism is our next bucket of our priorities. And we have some great opportunities here to expand trade, investment, and tourism. I mean, basically, since 95% of the world's population lives outside of our borders, we need to go and sell them something so we can, help fund our government. We need to, in the back to trade, American trade, we need to conclude our Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's TPP. We've been leading the fight for a trade agreement with the European Union, and that TTP, that's the trade agreement that our government's working on in the booming Pacific Basin. So we're also fighting for that. Included in these are the President's Authority. It's TPA, which is Trade Promotion Authority. The government does. We need to extend that to the current president so he can get some of these deals done. The reason we put in tourism, and that came up, $5. And that came up a couple of years ago when a lot of people in the tourism sector came to us and said, if you call it pre-9/11, September 9/11, we are about 1 million jobs short in the travel and tourism industry than we were pre-9/11. So we had almost 1 million jobs less in that sector. 12 years later, we're still suffering from 9/11 in that sector. So that's why we put in tourism. Hopefully that'll avoid a question later. Reforming regulations. This is one of our core areas that we've seen coming down. We've been talking about reforming or passing some kind of regulatory reform for almost as long as I've been with the chamber. And we see it as probably the greatest threat to the business community. And it's one of our single biggest issues. We've got a flood of new regulations that we know that it's going to discourage job creators. It's going to damage our competitive edge in our global economy. When you consider all the new rules pouring through the regulatory pipeline, the number is staggering. Dodd-Frank alone, the financial reform bill called Dodd-Frank, that mandates 447 new rules, and the regulators have only finalized a third of them. And that passed 4 years ago, I believe. So we're only a third into it. And then on the environmental front, major EPA rules imposed over the last decade have cost more than $23 billion, and its new ozone regulation could cost up to $90 billion. If the EPA moves forward with rules and greenhouse gas emissions and applies them beyond power plants and refineries, it could ensnare roughly 6 million facilities in burdensome permitting requirements. And of course, the flood of health in the healthcare arena on all the regulatory decisions that are coming out of HHS and Treasury on healthcare reform, which in fact, I don't know if you all saw this, but I don't know how I saw this in Dallas, but John Mackey, the CEO of Whole Foods, probably not the most conservative businessman in the world, but nonetheless is a businessman. And in fact, I'm not plugging him, but he actually wrote a new book he's out with called Conscious Capitalism. I wish it was said Conscious Free Enterprise, but anyway. Even John Mackey said that we need more free enterprise, not less, and really does think that the healthcare laws, the healthcare law and the regulations to follow are going to very, very much hurt his business model, and a lot of different changes are going to have to be made when this goes into full effect. Well, the taxes will go into full effect in 2013 and 14, and then the full effect for the states in, I believe, 2016. So, we've got to be concerned about 4,000 regulations a year. The federal government issues 4,000 regulations a year. And believe it or not, we've got a team of people at the U.S. Chamber that pore over these things. And of course, they're all attorneys, and thank goodness they've got to be, because who would understand what they're trying to say with these when they release these regulatory statutes that we all, well, that hopefully there are good people up there like us that are poring over those to try to say, you know, well, this is not feasible, and we seem to go to court a lot over those, and actually we win quite a bit too, so that's always good. So we've got to streamline the permitting process. It takes too long to build anything. It takes years, months for necessary permits. We've got to modernize our regulatory system to bring more accountability to regulators and to restore the role of Congress in the rulemaking process. And there is a vehicle for that. It's called, and it's a bipartisan bill in the House that passed last year, called the Regulatory Accountability Act. So we've been behind that. Hopefully the Senate will pick it up at some point, and maybe not. And thirdly, like I mentioned, we use our National Chamber Litigation Center that's headquartered in Washington, D.C., to fight and deal with these regulations, and also keep our members that their business sector is affected by these rules, and get them the information as quickly as possible, or fight it while they're making these decisions. Immigration reform. Many of y'all have probably seen the need for immigration reform. U.S. Chamber is 100% behind immigration reform. But what does immigration reform look like? As you may have seen, 8 senators yesterday, 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, came out and they announced a bipartisan framework, introduced it yesterday. I don't believe anybody has many issues with the framework that they released. All big issues, topics that everybody can agree on. And the problem is in fact, the president is going to, we believe, announce his immigration reform bill in Nevada today. Yeah. So the problem has always been, and we got close to passing the bill in 2007. Y'all recall, there were competing Senate bills that got a lot of traction. There was McCain-Kennedy, and then Cornyn and Kyle were 2 bills that got a lot of traction. But what happens is you start reading the details of those bills, and that's when the gloves come off. That's when politics seems to creep its way into the legislative process. And I think they'll do a better job this year. Right now, it sounds like they are interested in doing real immigration reform, and we're going to be all for that. But we'll see. It's day 2, so you know, it's we've got plenty of time for it to go south. I'm going to get back to Chuck Baker. We have, we believe, the U.S. Chamber believes that this country has grown and thrived because we've attracted and welcomed the most talented and hardest working citizens of the world to our shores. Immigrants teach at our universities, invest and invent our technology companies, staff our hospitals, care for our elderly and our young, harvest our food, and serve in our armed forces. And then given those changing demographics that I've mentioned, we need more workers to sustain our economy, support our retired population, and to stay competitive. Even with high unemployment, we have millions of job openings that go unfilled each year. Either the workers will come here for those jobs, or companies will take those jobs elsewhere. We're in a global economy, We need the world's best talent here. This is the competition that will separate economic leaders from laggers in the 21st century. So the U.S. Chamber is already teaming up with, yes, labor unions, faith organizations, ethnic groups, law enforcement, to build a coalition for comprehensive immigration reform. And there are probably a lot of people that say, hey, we just don't need to do nothing. But I heard recently somebody say doing nothing is de facto amnesty. And we believe that, and I think we are going to do everything we can in the immigration battle. And again, we were very supportive during the 2006-2007 debate on immigration reform. Here's what we need to do. Secure our borders, everybody believes that. But it's imperative that people and commerce flow efficiently and lawfully through our nation's ports and across our borders. Cross-time travel times at border crossings has skyrocketed, obviously due to security and other reasons, but those delays, slow down product. Our laws must be revised to welcome needed labor and talent into our economy through thoughtfully designed guest worker programs. This includes provisional visas for lesser skilled workers. It also includes expanding the caps for high-skilled visas and expanding green cards for foreign nationals who graduate from our colleges and universities with advanced degrees. The current system grants citizenship. I mean, if you go to the proper channel right now and apply to become a U.S. citizen, the process that we currently have in place, we average 1 million people become U.S. citizens per year, and that's through the avenue we have right now. Only 59,000 of those are immigrate and they're granted U.S. status for their high-skilled jobs of the ability. So 1 million come in, and only 59,000 come in because of their high-skilled either knowledge or skills that they have. And so we need to do something about that. We must get this economy growing faster. Growth at 1.5–2% is simply not good enough. It won't produce the jobs that we need or the revenues that the government needs to have to help reduce $1 trillion deficits or day-to-day operations. So those are the big ideas, the big thoughts. What we're going to be pretty aggressive in fighting this year. So what is the U.S. Chamber going to do? Well, we're going to continue to strengthen and improve ourselves as an organization, as an influential force and powerful brand at home and around the world. We will expand our grassroots network of small businesses, free enterprise advocates, and our Federation of Chambers and Industry Groups, while gearing up for, 2014 will be an election year, and we do get involved in endorsing candidates. So Doug doesn't have to. We do. We do it for you. Then you can blame us when something goes wrong or we pick the wrong guy. So it sounds like we are pretty much in a very difficult environment with a divided government. I was there for 3 days last week after the inauguration. This was for U.S. Chamber meetings. It was 3 days of meetings that sometimes didn't go so well, and it didn't go so well. But there are so many things and so many priorities, and everybody's trying to be on the front burner, and Congress is kind of just doing its normal thing, and people get frustrated, and We want to get something done for our members. I know Doug wants to get things done for his members. So it's difficult to make these things happen sometimes. So we stand ready to work with both parties, within both parties, with the administration, and both traditional allies and adversaries. We did a joint event with the AFL-CIO not too long ago about immigration reform. So if we can do it, hopefully they can. But we're not going to shy away from the disagreements that are going to come up. We're just going to steam forward, and hopefully our chamber members, our chambers across the country will see how important it is to get this economy moving again, so we can get those jobs, get those revenues to fund the government. So we're going to passionately defend the right of business, the right of the business community, and all Americans to speak freely and participate in the politics and public affairs of our democracy without fear of intimidation or undue regulation. So, as we're going to intensify our efforts to educate and explain the workings and principles of our free enterprise system to citizens, everyone, and government leaders, and including our fundamental values of risk, profit, individual initiative, and limited government. These values we see as most important for a free society. So the U.S. Chamber, again, I'm happy, Doug, that you have invited me. It was a great opportunity for me since I was just in D.C. last week. All this stuff is very new, but some we've been working on for a long time. The times change, the players change, so every once in a while I need to go and retune these things. So I'm happy to take any questions. I'm happy to maybe throw in a funny story. Again, I don't have any jokes, but for funny stories, I'm always I always have something. So with that, Doug, I can take some questions, or I can sit down and shut up. I can, you just tell me what to do.
Questions? I'll go ahead and ask the first couple.
Just out of curiosity, when you go to the website to sign up as an immigrant, how long does that process take?
On average, 8+ years is what I've heard. If you were to go legally through the process and register, 8 years. I'm told 8 years.
And why is it so long?
It's just a bureaucratic mess. I mean, you still have millions of people that want to be American citizens. It's a process that has been developed over 100 years. It's very bureaucratic. Things get lost. The people move because it takes so long, and there's no streamlining. It's not a streamlined system where one person handles somebody's immigration request from the beginning to end. It goes through 15 different departments. So 15, 20 different people put their hands on a file. And it gets lost. The people move. Plus, you have priorities and this is one thing I think is going to be talked about. The priorities of people that have that already have a family member that's a citizen. So that's the quickest way to go through the process. You've got so those people will move quicker. If you're just brand new saying, hey, I want to be a U.S. citizen, and do you have any family here? Do you have anybody? No, but I'm a skilled engineer. Well, great, but I've got a family member that's, all these other people that have family members that are already living here are priority. It's difficult.
You mentioned the Regulatory Accountability Act. Can you expand on that?
We support it. We endorsed, the U.S. Chamber endorsed it. We supported that legislation, and it passed the House. It passed the House It was a bipartisan bill. Now, I want to say there were only maybe about 4 or 5 of the other party on that bill, but again, it passed last year, and we supported it, and we did what we call a key vote letter. Basically, it's a letter that we send to the Hill saying, U.S. Chamber, for all these reasons, we want you to support, regulatory accountability, and it passed overwhelmingly.
I think the question was more, what is the purpose? What is it supposed to accomplish?
Oh, that Reform Act?
Yeah, what is it supposed to accomplish and how is it going to go about that?
The biggest item in there was streamlining the regulatory process. So rather than a permitting process that takes, which you would think, 6 months, maybe a year, depending on what your project is, for it to take 3, 4, 5, 6 years, there's something wrong there. The federal requirements are often duplicates of the state or local requirements. And then there's one section that was very important in that bill was the cost of the regulation. So Congress will get a report and say, if this regulation is enacted and it costs at minimum $100 million, so $100 million cost to the community or the business is going to suffer, then the law required that Congress look at, that Congress go back to the regulatory agency and figure out why and where are the costs, and this is going to be too costly of regulatory burden, and why. Right now, the EPA doesn't have to do that. They don't have to do is produce a study or even pay attention to a study on cost of their regulation. So this law was going to be.
So does the chamber get involved or monitor things that are going on, like with Fish and Wildlife Services related to endangered species? What do you guys do to kind of get involved in that process?
Yeah, it's a lot of times it's the state that's we work through. We help them. Well, when it's federal, we do what we can. In fact, what was the lizard out in West Texas? Sagebrush? No. Well, anyway, it was a little lizard that was preventing West Texas, Lubbock. In fact, Lubbock Chamber was very engaged in trying to get U.S. Fish and Wildlife to change it being a species that could not be harmed in West Texas. So basically, it was going to shut down production, oil production in certain aspects because of, I think it was the sagebrush lizard, one of those lizards. And so New Mexico, eastern New Mexico and West Texas was affected. A lot of times all you can do is submit information to the regulatory folks at U.S. Fish and Wildlife and say, this is why we don't agree with your decision, or when you're in the decision process, why you shouldn't go that direction. So it's tough, but a lot of people were affected and they did a great job. I think